It's hard to believe it's been about a year now since I dug and transplanted a Blue Arrow Juniper out of this location. We put a little peony in there. It's one of the more compact varieties, but let's take a look and see how our Blue Arrow Juniper fared in this new bed back here as we approach that area. That's a limelight hydrangea. Flower colors just starting to finish up. It's gone through the white, kind of a pink, and now it's getting into that brown. If you want to take a look at that earlier video that we did the transplanting, I'll put a card flashing across the top. It'll also show up in description, but this thing turned out, I gotta say, way better than I expected. I thought for sure we were gonna see a little bit of winter burn. I did not give this any TLC whatsoever. I planted it kind of halfway out of the ground because I knew eventually I was gonna bring in additional soil and burn this up. We watered it in maybe once or twice before winter, and then it was just on its own. And I pretty much let the spring rains just take care of it. Really, we had no winter burning on it. It still looks a little bit thin on the inner branches, but anytime you can get that growth, that you don't get dieback on the tips or any of the branches, you've pretty much hit a home run. You've got a successful transplant. So I tell you what, the junipers, they are one of the best plants for those difficult locations, whether it be dry, compact soil. It's not always going to work out great for you, but there's so many different varieties to pick from in the junipers. The upright, you've got the sprawling junipers. There's really just dozens and dozens of different species of junipers. So the juniper came through with flying colors, and we're on to the next step in this bed. And the first thing we did, I went ahead and I put this black poly edging in. Now I had this on hand, so I thought I might as well use it up. We're kind of nearing the end to the amount of beds that we plan on putting in this landscape, these gardens. So I used up the poly edging. I started out using a lot of the rock or the riprap as edging, but it's a higher maintenance thing. I love the look of it. Definitely more expensive. Transportation costs have gotten a little bit on the high side in our area, even though the rock is plentiful. And I use a combination. You can see here where that edging just kind of connects to where we take off into all rock edging. You can rent machines to put in this type of edging, get a perfect trench. Since it was such a short area, I went ahead and I just used my hand shovel. We'll first cut a line to get the trench started, and then I'll come back through and take out a plug to create that space needed for the edging. It's a lot easier to remove those sod clumps if you break them into smaller pieces. Since we'll be creating some berms, adding some additional soil, we'll just be throwing these clumps into the center, and then I'll come back through and clean up that edge, making a 90-degree angle for the edging. And here we are bringing in that additional soil, creating some contours, elevation changes. Something I always recommend is I think it adds an extra touch to our gardens. You can see I'm dumping it right over those soil clumps that we threw in from that trench area. And then I added fresh mulch. Now, the fresh mulch, it's gonna turn into more of a, I say a grayish almost. It fades quickly. I wish it would hold that golden brown. I like to use the Western Red Cedar mulch. It's more of a shredded mulch than a chip, and it tends to stay in place in windy areas or during heavy rains. I'll link to another video in the description where we top dress one of our other existing beds, and you'll see just how dramatically that new mulch changes the look of a garden. Yeah, then all that's left now is just picking out plants, getting them planted in there. Brings the whole project together, and eventually we'll end up looking just like that over there. Just a nice collage. Sizes, shapes, and colors. But this whole bed that we put in here is going to be quite dry. So we're going to go with drought-tolerant varieties, whether it be the Aster, the Monarda, Sedum. Yeah, Sedum's one of your best choices for just an explosion of color, fall blooming. I've got a video here you could certainly look at where we looked at some of the tall sedum. Got another one on the creeping sedum. Can't recommend that perennial enough. And just left of our Blue Arrow Juniper there, that's one of the Aster varieties, a really, really large one. We've got a massive one in one of our front beds, and I've started now to divide that out and put it in a few different locations. I am going to start planting some Monarda in here, also called bee balm. That'll also take it very dry. One of the reasons that Monarda is going to work great in this bed, I do not like to use poly or fabric. I allow my plants to naturalize, and that poly fabric, it's going to inhibit it. So underneath this mulch, it's just raw soil, and it's usually that first year that we really have to stay on top of the weeds. I'm going to put 3 of the Monarda in this area. I'm expecting they're going to get about only 2 feet no more than 3 feet tall with this variety. And the dry conditions from the spruce are going to take an enormous amount of the moisture, the nutrients. That's going to keep it shorter as well. So we'll do something just like that. And then I think I'm just going to put one more back over here behind this aster that we transplanted in. That'll give a nice contrast between that light purple early, and then we get into the other purple later in the season. Here again, it just becomes so much easier to plant if you're not dealing with that poly or fabric. We're immediately down to the soil. This is one of my absolute favorite shovels, by the way. Hard to find. Maybe if I can find it again, there's a company in the UK offers this stainless steel or chrome type shovel, but I just love the soft taper. It's got a nice blade, it really slices in. I'm going to loosen this plug up while it's still in the ground. Gonna have to chop it apart either way. To think about plants in containers, eventually they become very, very root bound. So eventually you do have to get them out of those containers. You can see there, you can see the roots starting to spiral around. It gets harder and harder to keep them moist just because you get more and more roots in there. So it's time to get these in the ground. Yeah, they're looking a little tough. We're into mid-September now. And just because of that drying them down, it's called a hardening off process. I allowed these just to basically start pushing themselves into their dormant condition. So really what we're planting is the root system. All this herbaceous tissue on the top is going to die back. So next spring we'll just cut this off and we'll get that new plant emerging. The Monarda that we're planting here was sourced from a native seed source, so they'll likely have a lavender bloom color, similar to the ones that you see here that I came across on a recent bike ride. But there's many different cultivars you can find at garden centers with much showier blooms, like into the reds or dark purples. The Monarda or bee balm is also a great plant for drawing in the pollinators, especially the bumblebees. And I'm looking forward to see this naturalize here, not only from the self-seeding, but also from the rhizome root habit that Monarda has. It's one of the more aggressive perennials, so keep that in mind when planting, as it can be considered invasive. Got 4 of them in the ground pretty quick. We'll get some water on these too, but really all I'm going to have to do, again, since this thing is already basically going dormant, we'll give it one watering, and it should be set for the season. Hopefully we'll get some snow cover and those spring rains, and out of the ground it'll come. And since fall is such a great time for transplanting, dividing perennials, I've decided this is the perfect time to move this double martini sedum. Look at this thing. This is just a really interesting, beautiful sedum. Sedum love the full sun, and it's starting to get choked out and shaded by this bonnie blue Colorado spruce that you see here. We're not going to finish this bed today. I'd rather continue to add new plants to this bed throughout the next couple of growing seasons. So fall is a great time for planting chores, and you'll be sure glad you did it come spring. We're about a month later now into mid-October, and that wraps up the fall planting we plan on doing in this bed. But we'll keep our eye out for new plants throughout the next couple growing season and continue to plant out this bed. You'll also notice in the back there, that's the aster that we had talked about a little bit earlier in the video. It's in full bloom now. Thanks for stopping by Garden Hike. We'll see you again next video.